welcome to the Pageturner. Before this episode starts, I want to inform you that topics covered in this episode may be found disturbing or uncomfortable to some listeners. As such, viewer or rather listener discretion is advised. Additionally, if you or a loved one needs help, help is available by dialing 988 for the suicide hotline. You are not alone. Now sit back, grab a snack, and enjoy the episode. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the Pageturner. I'm your host Christina, and first off, you may notice a little bit of different things. Number one, got a mic. Yay. Thank you, Mom and Dad. And second, I have a tripod, so now it's not going to look weird recording from the floor. Yippee! So my voice should sound a bit better, which I'm very happy about. Also, I'm sorry I haven't been keeping up with the schedule, just because with my school and just all of the stuff coming up. I have Tech Week. Oh my god, Tech Week is so exhausting. Yeah, that's really all you need to know about Tech Week. Speaking of Tech Week, come to the musical. It's gonna be fun. This will probably be posted after the musical, so if you came, thank you. If not, how dare you? Yeah, so let's get started. My last episode, I talked about what I was reading. Unfortunately, for this episode, I don't have anything to read. I've been in a 3-month reading slump, and despite me buying new books, I just haven't been reading. And I guess it's because of school, and I guess it's just because of a reading slump. I honestly don't know, but let's get straight into it. So last time we were together, we ended off with The Rise of the Psycho Killer from our period 1, and we went up to that. So today we're going to start off with period 4, which is considered the rise of popular horror. And it's from 1971 to 2000. That's what the book is. If you don't know what the book is, I would recommend go watching the first episode before you watch this. Would highly recommend reading the book in full. And this section was written by Stephen Handke. I don't know how to pronounce the last name, so I'm sorry. But in the early 1970s, there was this big horror boom, especially with sections of bookshops expanding in fantasy and sci-fi, but it began to fail as readers grew weary since the same tropes kept recycling, and therefore the genre lost its spot in the market due to becoming boring and predictable. The 1970s also provided a wide range of things for Americans to worry about. So utopian hopes actually stopped in the 1960s. And at this time, Richard Nixon was president, and his presidency was disintegrating, and Carter's so-called stagflation happens. Ronald Reagan's It's Morning in America campaign also happens. And I quote from this section too. Turning away from the vague sense of dread that had been its bread and butter during the preceding decade, 1980s horror would be driven by a desire to uncover the dark underbelly of this new self-confidence, to diagnose a stridency bordering on hysteria in the tone the nation would adopt in talking to itself and the rest of the world. So we also see 1980s horror fic boom from bestsellers from the 60s and 70s. This includes Frankenstein, Dracula, Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist, The Other, Harvest Home, even more pulp magazines, which are predisposed to short stories. And also, we see more media being presented through TV at this time. And I quote again. Early in the 1970s, Steven Spielberg's blockbuster version of Peter Benchley's novel Jaws, 1974, had demonstrated that a generously budgeted, vigorously and creatively promoted and competently directed adaptation of a cheesy 1950s creature feature had the potential to break out of the ghetto of horror and reach a vast mainstream audience. So I feel like it's upstairs. I have a copy of the retro-ish cover of Jaws. That's the one that's kind of like the movie poster where you see the swimmer and then the water and the shark. It's really cool. We also see neo-horror films rise at this time, like The Night of the Living Dead. Now, in the 1980s, we see more spots open for new writers such as Dean Koontz, Robert McCammon, Hubie Cave, and Lisa Tuttle. And there's more relationships between horror fiction and place. And I quote again, "The list also features writers whose works drew upon a sense of American regionalism, carrying on an older tradition in which horror fiction had been associating itself with the landscape and history of a particular American region or local culture." So it's more specialization of culture. We also see the rise of the small town trope, and this is most associated with Stephen King, especially with Carrie and Salem's Lot. His main books are set in this fictional town, Castle Rock, Maine. It is set in Derry, Maine. So it's just a lot of small town stuff throughout all of his books. And Stephen King also uses hyper-realism mixed with pop culture references. And this cultural tradition is also shared by Peter Straub, who wrote Ghost Story. We also see anthologies rise, and a new style of horror and historical range comes of it. We also see longer novels come out. So The Stand, which is also by Stephen King, is 1,000 pages long in modern printings. It is very long, and it is basically detailing that this virus has swept the nation, killed 99% of people. The 1% of people, they're just split and they're fighting. And that sounds very similar to what happened years ago. Okay. And I quote again, "Not by coincidence that the small town setting, which was to play such an important role in 1980s horror fiction, traces ancestry back through a primary female tradition. From New England regionalists such as Sarah Orne Jewett and Mary Wilkins Freeman around the turn of the century to Shirley Jackson and Grace Metelius in the 1950s. In 1980s novels were about American small towns were primarily written by men, as would be much of the fiction during the boom in general. Female writers would move on to other things. And now we see Anne Rice come to play. She is the main author of the Interview with the Vampire series, which has become very popular. She also dominates bestseller lists with these vampire novels. We also see British writers also profit, including Ramsey Campbell and James Herbert. Now we can segue into the early 1990s. So the HWA is founded in 1985 and begins to hand out the Bram Stoker Award in 1988. This is essentially an award that goes out to the best horror novels. And on my personal Instagram account, I know you guys probably don't know it, but I'm planning to make a post detailing all the awards, all book awards, what they mean. So we also see the rise of splatterpunk. And let me just search up what splatterpunk is. I believe it's almost like cyberpunk. Okay, here. Splatterpunk is a 1980s originated subgenre of horror fiction by its intense, graphic, and unapologetic deception of violence and gore. So it's almost like extreme horror. So we see same in splatterpunk in, extreme horror plus Skip and Spector's Book of the Dead, which involves graphic violence and bodily injury, like I stated. And David Shaw coined this term in 1986, and it took the rise from sci-fi cyberpunk. Now, this was mainly male-dominated, but Kathy Koja explored physical vulnerability that changed gender lines, and some of her books were more about bodily modification. And when she entered the market, horror began to decline. And I quote again, "Since writers such as King and Straub, who represented horror as a commercial mainstream, became increasingly associated with massive, in quote, doorstep novels, the corrective countermove to keep horror from growing stale or repetitive was to slim volumes down, and immersive was essentially redefined. We also see Kim Newman enter the scene before publishing Horror 100 Best Books with Stephen Jones, but he deconstructed horror tropes in his novels and short fiction. We also see Thomas Ligotti also enter the scene, publishing books that were a departure from 1980s hyperrealism, which includes Songs of Dead Dreamer, and the market eventually crashed. But the impact didn't stop there, as mystery fiction profited the most from the market loss. We also see serial killer novels also rise, such as Red Dragon and Silence of the Lambs. Silence of the Lamb is a big serial killer movie and book, as I stated. And I quote again. I have a lot of quotes, I'm sorry. As noted in Chapter 5, which was previous chapter, Harris's immense commercial success created the serial killer novel as a subgenre of the murder mystery, spicing up the police procedural with the gore borrowed from horror. We also see female writers dominate. Their domain, expands to include forensic thrillers, autopsies and murders. Hey! Okay. We also see American Psycho closing the gap between literary mainstream and splatterpunk, which was published by Bret Easton Ellis. And we also see horror is still a big reference point for fiction and stuff of most mainstream publishers. So I'm actually planning to film this in chunks, but I have time right now. So let's see how much we can get through of this. Okay. So this is the final period we'll go through, and it's period 5 post-millennium horror. So this goes from 2000 to 2016, and it was written by Xavier Ordonez, who is the author of this book. So horror as a genre again rises in the 21st century. Keene, Koontz, and Barker are part of the mainstream publishing houses, and the result of horror being accepted as a genre, fueled by popular authors like Stephen King. The horror market also developed to suit readers' wants, and more significantly, horror had a strong hold in graphic novels and comics such as The Walking Dead. And this first section is called the established horror auteur. And here it says, one of the key differences between the post-millennial period and previous ones is, as I have noted, so this is another quote, the establishment and canonism of a series of writers who have led very successful lives as horror auteurs. So I did some research on what an auteur was, and this is another quote from Oxford Dictionary. It is considered a filmmaker whose personal influence and artistic control over a movie is so great that the filmmaker is regarded as the author of the movie. And here it says, another quote, although they are well known, their work is still relatively niche, with their names not necessarily recognizable to readers outside the horror and dark fantasy circuits. Other writers, however, have by now had long and prolific careers, spawning a number of texts considered classics and often adapted to screen, including, almost every single Stephen King novel. Come on. Also, the work has taken a crucial dip. I believe his work, I'm reading notes, and he essentially is reusing old territory and is exhausted of his ideas. So this is about Stephen King. We also see Barker taking up other projects, but he has actually worked on other films and video games such as Jericho, and Campbell received many awards for his work, and in this time he greatly returned with fresh work. Next we see new voices arise. So only some foreign authors have actually made an impact in the US market, such as S.L. Gray, Lauren Bukes, and Peter Connolly. But the most famous ones are either American or British. So Joe Hill, who's actually the son of Stephen King, is a great horror author and actually wrote The Black Phone, which got turned into a movie. And I quote again, this collection already pointed to some of the motifs and themes Hill would later develop in his novels, and which are eminently Christian in their nature. The fight between good and evil, the pervasive nature of sin, especially when connected to perceived sexual perversions, the possibility of an afterlife, and the purity of children. The latter is perhaps the most significant, and Hill's interest in child psychology belies his main writing influence, that of his own father. We also see The Heart-Shaped Box become an updated ghost story, and we see Nosferatu, which follows a child kidnapper. Believe this is also a series on Netflix. My parents watch this. And it is hard for non-English speaker authors to be successful outside their home countries, but John Ajvi Lindqvist, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, is the exception, as he is from Sweden and wrote Let the Right One In, which is a retelling of a vampire novel, and his second novel handles a zombie outbreak plot, which is called Handling the Undead. Now, this next section is considered contemporary and the new weird. So we see the weird horror popular in the 21st century. And we also see a H.P. Lovecraft phase, who I previously mentioned, which is their reappraisal. So they made their way into cultural adaptations like Cthulhu, and it's connected to the 21st century recuperation of genre fiction. And he's interested in his fictional creations, and this therefore sparked artists to expand his work and create tributes to his creations. We also see the anxiety of influence become less problematic, as the new weird defines similar yet a different subgenre. And I quote, the contemporary weird is marked out by the influence of the Lovecraftian tradition, is more readily aligned with horror, and especially but not exclusively concerned with cosmic horror, and has proliferated mostly in the short story format. We also see Ramsey Campbell and Leigh Barron enter the scene, and this is significant because we see multi-time award winner Shirley Jackson come in, and the books in general contain mystic lore, aliens, occult sex, dreams, hallucinogenic horror that comes from non-Euclidean physiognomies. In general, we also see weird fiction, which is the main point of this. These are stories either set in alternative futures or pasts, and they are reimagined motifs and characters, such as Clive Barker's Book of Blood and Jeff Vandermeer. We see the New Weird as a developed sci-fi for him from the 1960s, which is of Cities of Saints and Madmen and Finch. Jeff Vandermeer also, I believe, wrote the Annihilation series. I believe so. I've heard those are good. Yes, I am right. Okay. So, yeah, there you go. We also see a zombie boom come in, publishing boom in general. So, actually, 70 notable zombie novels were published between 2000 and 2016. And Max Brooks actually contributed a lot to the genre by publishing the Zombie Survival Guide, Complete Protection from the Living Dead. This expanding zombie lore as a whole, as it contains weapons to combat them, dispel myths about them, while exposing their nature and symptoms of infection. And I quote, "The viral zombie has resonated with our microbiology-aware present, and its affliction has spread to fellow monsters." His second book, World War Z, An Oral History of the Zombie War, is told as a collection of interviews during data gathering for the United Nations Post-War Commission report and marketed as a book of memories, and is composed of a collection of interviews with survivors. And I quote again, "Thus, the novel intends to highlight what its anonymous reporter terms the human factor, distinguished from the cold data and timelines of the Purge report, and establishes itself as an alternative history that will allow readers not to lose perspective of the real cost of the past." And this mainly relied on psychological consequences on zombie attacks. But not all zombie fiction was taken as seriously, as we see Pride and Prejudice and Zombies by Seth Grahame-Smith being published. As this title basically states, it's literally Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, but with zombies. It's literally like copy and paste the script to Pride and Prejudice, but like make a few edits. It's like, oh, wait. How do I say this? It's like, oh, you can copy my homework, but don't make it too obvious. Yeah, it was kind of obvious. But it was an effective mashup, I will say that. The same thing happened, but with Dawn of the Dreadfuls. And this was about Elizabeth Bennet's upbringing on Finding the Dead. It is the second novel to Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. And we also see other parodies of Austen novels, such as Sense and Sensibility and Sea Monsters. I have Sense and Sensibility. Oh, it's upstairs again. Okay. It's fine. And I quote again, "More than any other monster, zombies have become the most pervading horror icon from the early 21st century, Their metaphorical value has allowed for readers that understand the shambling, endlessly replicable, empty-minded mass of the undead as negotiating pressing concerns related to the economics, public education or politics, or the terrible legacy of neoliberal capitalism on the contemporary subject. And in general, they serve as a symbol of fear connected to technological times and the view that we are already living in those end times." And I quote again, and this will be the final quote that I say. "It is not surprising, then, that in Stephen King's Cell, it is precisely a signal called the pulse," it just says the pulse, "broadcast over the global phone network, which corrupts the brains of its listeners and becomes the catalyst for the zombie apocalypse." As it basically says, Stephen King's Cell is just basically a zombie outbreak caused by cell phones. So, yeah. And that's really it. I can't believe I finished this. I can't believe I finished my first technical episode. Split over to 2 parts, because why not? I hope you enjoyed it, and please keep following me if you want more horror content. Thank you, guys.